The village of Kumba lay on the gentle slopes of the eastern hills, a place where the earth itself seemed to breathe with the warmth of ancient spirits. For generations, the people who lived there believed that life flowed in harmony only when the living honored those who had walked before them. Every pathway, every field, every river bend carried stories of ancestors whose wisdom guided the living and whose presence lingered like the soft scent of burning herbs during ceremonies. At the center of Kumba stood the ancestral shrine, a humble circular structure made of red clay and palm branches. It was not grand in appearance, but the villagers treated it with reverence deeper than any palace. For them, the shrine was the heart of the village, where blessings began, where protection dwelled, and where every chief made a sacred oath before assuming leadership. No chief was considered the owner of the shrine. He was its guardian, chosen by the ancestors to protect their covenant with the living. For many years, Kumba lived in prosperity. The soil was rich and fertile, the rains fell at the right time, and the people's harvest festivals were filled with laughter, dancing, and the deep drumbeats that echoed across the hills. Crops grew in abundance, the river never ran dry, and the hunters rarely returned empty-handed. Villagers believed this harmony existed because their ancestors were content. Mothers told their children that the spirits walked among the trees at dusk, watching over them with both love and caution. The man entrusted with maintaining this sacred balance was Chief Mbeku, the leader whose lineage stretched back to the founding of Kumba. When he first inherited the position from his father, the villagers praised him for his strength, wisdom, and calm judgment. He was known for performing rituals with sincerity and for listening to the elders before making important decisions. For a time, it seemed as though Mbeku was destined to become one of the most respected chiefs in Kumba's history. But as the seasons passed, subtle changes began to appear in him. He developed a fascination with the outside world, its wealth, its luxuries, its promises of modern advancement. Traders from distant towns brought shiny objects and tales of easy riches. Although the villagers' lives were simple, Mbeku began to imagine a future where he could be more than just a chief guarded by spirits. He dreamed of expanding his influence, building roads, and attracting wealth to the village. These dreams were not wrong by themselves, but slowly, they grew into an untamed desire that started to overshadow his duty. Still, the people did not know these thoughts were forming inside him. They continued to trust him, believing he would always protect the ancestral grove that surrounded the shrine, a sacred forest where no tree could be cut and no soil could be disturbed. The elders often reminded him that the grove was not merely land, it was a living memory of the ancestors, the bridge connecting the world of the living and the world of spirits. Disturbing it was unthinkable. Yet, as the sun set behind the hills and shadows stretched across the village, there was a quiet sense that the balance of Kumba would soon be tested. The air held a strange heaviness, as if the ancestors themselves sensed the storm approaching. And while the villagers continued their daily routines, unaware of the changes unfolding, the spirits watched with silent concern, because the heart of Kumba, the sacred covenant between the living and the dead, stood on the edge of betrayal. Not long after the first signs of imbalance settled quietly into the spirit of Kumba, a group of foreign traders arrived at the village's edge. They were unlike any visitors the villagers had seen before, men dressed in crisp shirts, boots that shone unnaturally, and belts heavy with tools that glinted under the sun. They traveled in wagons pulled by robust horses, their chests filled with strange equipment and glittering objects. When they spoke, their accents carried a sharpness unfamiliar to the villagers, and their eyes scanned the land with a hunger that made the elders uneasy. Chief Mbeku greeted them with the courtesy expected of a leader. The traders bowed respectfully, offering gifts, polished metal bracelets, cloth dyed in radiant colors, and a flask filled with a sweet-smelling drink. Their leader introduced himself as Baisa, a man with quick speech, a disarming smile, and an ambition burning behind his calm expressions. He told Mbeku that he and his men were explorers searching for places rich in precious stones. They had heard rumors that the hills around Kumba held minerals of great value, enough to bring prosperity to the entire region. At first, Mbeku listened with polite interest but maintained the dignity expected of a guardian of ancestral land. "Our hills are sacred," he said firmly. "The earth beneath them belongs to the ancestors. We cannot disturb it." Baisa nodded slowly, appearing to understand, but there was a flicker in his eyes, an expression that revealed he was not ready to give up. That evening, long after the traders set up camp near the river, Mbeku returned to his compound carrying the gifts they had offered. The bracelets shimmered even in the dim firelight, the cloth felt soft beneath his fingers, and the sweet drink warmed his chest in a way he had never experienced. As he handled the objects, a thought crept into his mind: what would it feel like to possess more than this? What if the village could grow, expand, modernize? What if he could lead them into a new era? For days, the traders lingered near Kumba, walking the hills, examining stones, and making friendly conversation with the villagers. Baisa requested another meeting with Mbeku, this time offering something far more dangerous, a promise that their company would pay a fortune if they were allowed to mine just a small part of the land around the ancestral grove. With this wealth, Baisa said, you could build new homes, a school, even a marketplace. Your village could become the pride of the region. Mbeku hesitated. He knew the grove was the most sacred place in Kumba, protected by generations of chiefs and watched over by the spirits of many ancestors. The terms of his leadership were clear: he did not own the land, he guarded it. Violating that trust meant violating his very identity. Yet as Baisa unfolded more treasures, silver coins, polished gems, tools that could carve stones in moments, Mbeku felt something stir inside him. A thirst not for development, but for personal glory. The elders sensed a shift in the chief's spirit. They visited him one evening, bringing no accusations, only concern. Elder Jonah, the oldest and most respected, placed a hand on Mbeku's shoulder and whispered, "My son, the spirits listen even when men whisper in the dark. Be careful with your thoughts, for they may lead your feet into dangerous places." But Mbeku brushed off their worries. He assured them nothing would threaten the ancestral land, yet his mind was already drifting elsewhere, toward meetings with the traders at dusk, toward deals hidden in the shadows of the hills. And as the nights passed, the chief's footsteps carried him closer and closer to a decision that would test not only his loyalty but the spiritual backbone of Kumba itself. The villagers continued their days unaware of the quiet storm forming in the heart of their leader. Birds sang, children played, and women carried water from the river. But the wind sometimes blew with an unusual chill. The drums during evening gatherings seemed to hesitate, as though echoing the ancestors' warning. Change was coming, deep, heavy, and irreversible, and only the spirits understood the danger that lay ahead. The night Mbeku crossed the threshold of no return was unusually silent. Even the insects that usually hummed through the darkness seemed to hold their breath. A pale moon hung low above the hills as Baisa and two of his traders waited beneath the shadow of an ancient tree near the sacred grove. Their lanterns flickered weakly, casting distorted shapes onto the roots that coiled like protective guardians around the forest floor. Mbeku approached them with slow, uneasy steps, the weight of his decision pressing onto his shoulders like a mountain. He knew that what he was about to do was forbidden, yet the promise of wealth, recognition, and the transformation of Kumba echoed relentlessly in his Mind. Baisa unfolded a leather document, marked with symbols Mbeku could not fully understand. He dipped a quill into ink and handed it to the chief. This agreement, Baisa whispered, grants us permission to explore and extract stones only around the edges of the grove. We will not disturb the shrine itself. You have my word. Mbeku hesitated, glancing toward the dark outline of the sacred trees. For a moment, he thought he heard footsteps, light, rhythmic, like the tread of ancestors watching him. But when he looked again, the darkness stood still. His breath trembled. He closed his eyes, silencing the inner voice begging him to turn back, and pressed his thumb into the ink before placing it onto the document. Barasa's smile widened as he rolled up the paper and tucked it under his coat. When it was done, a cold wind swept through the grove, shaking the leaves in a violent shiver even though the night was calm. The traders exchanged uneasy glances. But Mbeku forced a hollow smile. It is only the wind, he said, though his own heart thumped painfully. They returned to the village's edge in silence, each step echoing with the realization that something sacred had just been broken. The following morning, the villagers noticed strange disturbances. The sacred tree at the heart of the grove, a towering, ancient giant that had blossomed faithfully for decades, was shedding its leaves as though struck by drought. Children playing nearby saw the fallen leaves and ran back to tell their parents, but the adults dismissed it as an unusual season. Yet the signs continued. When the drummers gathered at dusk for the evening rhythm, the drums released a dull, lifeless sound, as if the spirits had withdrawn their energy. Women grinding grain in the early hours heard whispers coming from the direction of the grove, soft but mournful, like the distant cry of a grieving mother. That same day, without informing the villagers, workers hired by Baisa began digging at the grove's border. Their metal tools struck the soil with unnatural force, splintering roots that had grown untouched for generations. Birds fled from the treetops in swarms, screeching as they disappeared into the sky. The miners laughed nervously, trying to ignore the unsettling atmosphere, but even they felt as if unseen eyes were watching them from the shadows of the forest. Mbeku tried to maintain calm, telling himself the changes were coincidence. But each time he walked past the grove, a chill crawled across his skin. He avoided looking at the shrine entirely. The guilt he carried grew heavier with every passing hour, yet he buried it beneath forced smiles and hollow words of reassurance to the council. Meanwhile, villagers whispered among themselves, sensing that something profound had shifted in their spiritual foundation. The ancestors, once a comforting presence, now felt distant, as though they were withdrawing their protection. Healers complained that their blessings felt weaker. Hunters returned empty-handed. The air around the village seemed thicker, heavier, as if holding back an unspoken truth. But the full truth of Mbeku's betrayal remained hidden, known only to him, the traders, and the spirits watching silently from the unseen world. And as the miners dug deeper into the forbidden land, the wound inflicted upon the ancestral bond widened, preparing to unleash a storm of consequences that no one in combat could yet imagine. The first true sign of the ancestors' anger arrived quietly, almost unnoticed. A group of farmers woke before dawn to tend their fields and found their crops withered as though scorched by an invisible fire. These were fields that had flourished just days earlier, maize standing tall, yams thick beneath the soil, beans climbing eagerly up their stakes. Now the leaves were brittle, curling inward, and the stems bent lifelessly toward the earth. The farmers stared in disbelief, exchanging horrified glances. No drought had struck the region, no insects had infested the land. It was as if the breath of life itself had been sucked from the fields overnight. Soon after, the river that fed Kumba's water supply began to shrink. At first, it was only a slight drop in its level, hardly worth attention. But as days passed, the stream thinned into a shallow ribbon, exposing stones that had not seen daylight in years. Women fetching water whispered nervously, recalling old stories once told by their grandmothers, tales that warned that when the spirits recoiled from a village, even the rivers would retreat. Livestock, too, began to disappear. Those that grazed near the grove never returned. Chickens vanished from their coops without a single feather left behind. Hunters who ventured into the hills came back empty-handed and shaken, claiming the forest felt hostile, as though something powerful and unseen stalked between the trees. One hunter swore he heard drumming deep inside the grove long past midnight, drumming that echoed with no human present to play it. Illness followed soon after. It began with a few people complaining of sudden dizziness, then spread rapidly. The sickness was unlike any healer had encountered. Fever came and went unpredictably, some villagers lost their voices, others their strength. Babies cried relentlessly, unable to sleep, their tiny bodies trembling as if reacting to forces beyond the physical. Healers gathered herbs, performed rituals, and sought guidance from the ancestors, but their prayers fell into an unseen void. The sacred fire within the shrine sputtered weakly, unable to stay lit for more than a few minutes, an unmistakable sign that the spirits had turned their faces away. Rumors spread like wildfire. Mothers clutched their children tightly, elders exchanged fearful glances. Some whispered that the ancestors were punishing Kumba, that someone had violated the sacred covenant that had protected the village for generations. But no one dared voice the thought aloud, not yet. Then one night, the truth began to reveal itself. The oldest ancestor medium, Mama Lemba, woke from a terrifying vision. Her voice shook as she called the council together before dawn. Her eyes were clouded with fear as she spoke. The spirits have shown me what our eyes could not see. Our suffering is not from nature, nor sickness, nor misfortune. The chief, our chief, has sold the soul of our ancestors. Her voice cracked as she uttered the final words. The grove has been defiled. The council sat in stunned silence. Some refused to believe it. Others demanded that Mbeku be summoned immediately. But when they confronted him, the chief denied everything, claiming Mama Lemba's vision was a mistake brought on by age and exhaustion. His denial only deepened the unrest. Villagers gathered in uneasy clusters, whispering among themselves, watching Mbeku with eyes once filled with respect but now shadowed with suspicion. Meanwhile, at the mining site, the traders themselves began to feel the wrath of the spirits. Their equipment malfunctioned, their tents collapsed in the middle of the night, strange voices echoed from the trees, speaking in languages no living person understood. Baiza tried to maintain order, but fear gnawed at his men. One by one, the traders abandoned their work and fled the village under the cover of darkness, leaving tools scattered on the ground like evidence of their intrusion. The grove, once serene and alive, now pulsed with a dark, restless energy. The wind moaned through the branches like a wounded animal. The air carried a weight that pressed upon anyone who dared approach. It was as if the ancestors themselves were gathering, preparing to unleash the full force of their anger upon the one who had violated sacred trust. And as disaster tightened its grip around Kumba, the people understood at last that their world was unraveling, not because the spirits had grown cruel, but because the bond that had protected them for generations had been broken by the hands of their own chief. The ancestors had been betrayed, and they would not be silent. The storm that finally broke over Kumba came without warning. Clouds gathered so quickly that the sky darkened within minutes, swallowing the morning sun. Winds roared through the village like a living creature, ripping thatched roofs from homes and scattering dried leaves across the paths. Thunder cracked violently above the hills, shaking the very ground beneath people's feet. The villagers ran for shelter as rain poured down in sheets so heavy that even the strongest men struggled to remain standing. But the heart of the storm, the place where lightning struck with terrifying precision, was the chief's compound. A blinding flash ripped through the sky, and a bolt of lightning crashed directly into the roof of Mbeku's house, setting it ablaze in a burst of white flame. The villagers gasped in horror as flames consumed the wooden beams, yet the rain did nothing to extinguish them. Instead, the fire burned with an otherworldly glow, twisting and writhing as though fueled by a force beyond nature. Mbeku stumbled out into the storm, his clothes soaked and his face pale with terror. In that moment, as he watched his home collapse under the wrath of the heavens, the weight of his betrayal finally broke him. He fell to his knees in the mud, the storm battering him from all sides. Villagers gathered at a distance, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and grief. For the first time since the misfortunes began, Mbeku's voice trembled with truth. "I have sinned against the ancestors," he cried, his words nearly drowned by the thunder. "I betrayed the trust they placed upon me. I gave away what was never mine to give." The elders approached slowly, their faces grim. Mama Lemba, frail yet firm, stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though sorrow hung heavy in it. "The ancestors have shown us your deeds, Mbeku. But confession alone does not restore what you have broken." The council gathered around him as he bowed his head in shame, unable to meet their eyes. When the storm finally calmed, the elders led Mbeku into the meeting house. There, in the flickering light of oil lamps, they decided the only path forward, a cleansing ritual unlike any performed in generations. "If you truly seek forgiveness," Elder Jonah said, "you must enter the grove alone. You must face the spirits without the protection of the living. Only they can decide if your soul is worthy of redemption." Mbeku accepted without hesitation. The guilt that had haunted him for weeks had become unbearable. Facing the ancestors was a fate he feared, but one he knew he must embrace. That night, as the village fell into an uneasy silence, he prepared himself for the journey into the grove. He bathed in cold water mixed with healing herbs, donned a simple cloth, and carried only a calabash of pure river water, symbol of truth and humility. When he reached the entrance of the grove, the air shifted. The forest was darker than he had ever seen it, its shadows trembling as though alive. The trees creaked and groaned, and a chilling breeze circled him, whispering in a language that made his skin crawl. Mbeku stepped forward, his feet sinking into the damp earth. With each step, a sense of judgment pressed harder upon him. At the heart of the grove, where the sacred tree once stood tall, now lay broken roots and trampled soil. The miner's destruction had scarred the land deeply. Mbeku knelt before the ruins, tears mixing with the dirt beneath his hands. "Ancestors," he whispered, "I come not to defend myself, but to beg for your mercy. I have wronged you. I have wronged our people. Take whatever you will from me, but spare Kumba." The air grew heavy. A faint glow appeared among the branches, followed by several more, soft spheres of light that flickered like ancient candles. Slowly, the shapes formed into translucent figures, their faces carved with wisdom, sorrow, and disappointment. They encircled Mbeku, their voices echoing like thunder, muffled by distance. He felt memories flood his mind, his father crowning him as chief, the oaths he had sworn, the pride he once felt in serving his people. Then came the memory of his betrayal, replaying before him with painful clarity. One spirit stepped forward, the pale outline of his own father. His voice was deep and resonant. You forgot who you were, my son. You forgot the covenant that binds us. You traded our soul for wealth that cannot feed the spirit. Overwhelmed, Baku bowed until his forehead touched the earth. Forgive me, he begged. I will restore what I destroyed. I will return the land to sacred hands. I will live the rest of my days serving the shrine. The spirits remained silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then, together, they spoke, redemption is earned through deeds, not words. Restore the grove. Return the land. Guide the people back to the path. Only then will harmony return to Kumba. The lights flickered once more before fading into the darkness. As the grove returned to silence, Baku collapsed in exhaustion, drained but alive, spiritually scarred, yet reborn with a new purpose. By dawn, he emerged from the forest transformed. His once proud posture was now humble. His voice, when he spoke to the elders, was soft but resolute. The ancestors have spoken, he said. I will restore their home, or I will die trying. And for the first time since the calamities began, the villagers felt a faint shift in the air, a small but undeniable sign that hope, long buried beneath misfortune, was beginning to stir once more. The days that followed Mbaku's confession marked a turning point for Kumba. Whispers of hope rippled through the village like a soft wind after a long drought. Though the wounds left by the calamities were still deep, the villagers sensed that something had shifted, that perhaps the ancestors, though angered, were listening. Mbaku wasted no time. From the moment he returned from the grove, he devoted every hour of daylight to undoing the damage he had caused. He gathered the villagers in the central square and addressed them with humility that many had never seen in him before. My hands caused this suffering, he said, but my hands will also mend it. I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask for the chance to earn it. The elders, seeing the sincerity burning in his voice, agreed to guide the restoration. Under their direction, the entire village united in a mission larger than any dispute or fear. Men, women, and children all joined in rebuilding the sacred grove. It began with clearing the destruction left behind by the miners, the broken roots, the fallen branches, the deep scars in the earth. The villagers worked tirelessly, singing old songs that had not been heard in years, invoking the spirits with every breath. Mama Lumber supervised the planting of new saplings, each chosen carefully from the surviving patches of forest. Elder Jonah oversaw the cleansing rituals, sprinkling herbs and river water across the ground to purify it. Even the children carried small baskets of soil blessed by the elders, eager to take part. And there, among them all, was Mbaku, digging, lifting, carrying, sweating, never complaining, never resting until the last ember of daylight disappeared. When the grove began to show signs of life again, the elders announced that the final ritual could take place, the ceremony of appeasement, a sacred rite performed only when harmony between the living and the ancestors had been broken. It was held on the night of the new moon, when the sky was at its darkest and the veil between worlds was thinnest. The villagers gathered around the rebuilt shrine, torches illuminating their faces with warm, flickering light. Drums echoed through the trees, steady, solemn, ancient. The air smelled of burning herbs and sweet palm wine offered to the spirits. Mbaku approached the shrine, last, escorted by the council. He knelt before the sacred tree's young sapling, pressing both palms into the earth. His voice trembled as he recited the oath of renewal, by the breath of my ancestors, by the land that gave me life, I vow to guard this grove until my final day. Let my blood be the bond that seals this promise. As he finished, the elders poured purified water over his hands. The drums grew louder, vibrating through the ground like the heartbeat of the forest. Suddenly, a soft wind swept through the grove, rustling the leaves despite the stillness of the night. The torches flickered but did not go out. The villagers held their breath. Then, a glow appeared. It grew from the roots of the sapling, pulsing gently like a sleeping ember awakened. The light spread upward, illuminating the branches before floating into the air in shimmering waves. One by one, faint figures appeared, ancestors in flowing forms of gold and silver mist. Their presence filled the grove with warmth, as if the earth itself exhaled in relief. Mama Lemba fell to her knees, whispering tearful prayers. The villagers bowed, trembling with reverence. Even Beku, who had prepared himself for this moment, felt overwhelmed as the spirit of his father stepped forward. Beku, the spirit spoke, its voice like distant thunder softened by compassion. You have returned the land to us. You have remembered the covenant. Today, the bond between the living and the departed is restored. The villagers gasped as the spirits raised their hands. A wave of light washed over the grove, sweeping outward across Kumba. The cursed fields, once dry and barren, seemed to breathe again. The river, which had grown cloudy and weak, shimmered with renewed clarity. The heavy, suffocating air that had haunted the village lifted like a veil removed after years of darkness. The spirits slowly faded, their forms dissolving into the leaves, until only the soft glow of the sapling remained. The elders bowed their heads in gratitude, and the villagers began to weep, not from fear, but from release. At dawn, the first rays of sunlight kissed the grove with a brightness deeper than any dawn in recent memory. Birds that had abandoned the village returned, filling the air with music. The fields glistened with fresh dew, and the scent of new life drifted on the wind. Beku stood at the edge of the grove, the weight of his journey carved into his face but replaced now with peace. Elder Jonah approached him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. You have done what many chiefs could not, he said. Redemption is not the absence of sin, but the courage to face it and make it right. From that day on, Beku served his people with humility. He rebuilt Kumba not as a ruler seeking praise, but as a guardian chosen by both the living and the dead. The villagers, once divided by fear and anger, grew united once more. And the sacred grove, reborn from ashes, became stronger than ever, its sapling growing tall and proud as a symbol of divine forgiveness. Years later, elders would tell the story to young children playing beneath the grove's shade. They would point to the great tree and say, "This is where the ancestors forgave us. This is where a chief was reborn. And this is where Kumba found its soul again." The curse had ended. The spirits had returned. And harmony, hard won and dearly paid for, became the village's greatest blessing.